Okay, looks like we are ready. Good morning, folks. I'm Dr. Barbara Mink. Our session today is on the future of Navajo education, and it really is a session that builds on the work that we've been doing for decades in collaboration with Fielding and the Navajo Nation. And it also highlights the book that was recently published of the same name, The Future of Navajo Education, where all the chapters are chapters written by members of the Navajo Nation, which come out of some of our conferences that we've been doing over the past several years. I've got several distinguished people that are going to be presenting this morning. The first person up will be Dr. Manly Begay, who has a very distinguished national and international reputation in Indigenous nation building. He's currently a tenured professor at Northern Arizona University. He's also taught for several years at Harvard University. So we're really pleased to have Dr. Begay with us this morning. Dr. Miranda Haskey will also be a presenter on our panel. Miranda is a professor of sociology at Dinek College on the Navajo Nation, and she is a strong advocate for the preservation of the Diné language and culture. And some of her work is actually archived now in the Smithsonian Institute Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., with a living history that she did of some Navajo elders. I have the picture of Dr. Henry Fowler also here. He will not be a presenter this morning, but he has been really front and center of the work that we've done over the years to look at advancing the Navajo language and the Navajo culture in the education system throughout the Navajo Nation. He himself has done work in mathematics and in bringing the Navajo culture in actually to the mathematics curriculum. And he has a video that I've actually seen on the television on PBS on his math circles. So he is also a very distinguished member of our group. Now, the situation on the Navajo Nation, and this is some of the work that Ms. Rose Graham, who is the executive director of ONSFA, which is the Office of Scholarship Office and Financial Assistance of the Navajo Nation. She was saying that there is really a need for highly qualified educators to provide, education that prepares students on and off the nation. She notes that the infrastructure on the nation is lacking, very scarce broadband availability. Some communities have very limited access to the internet, and we still have a situation with many residents living without electricity or even running water. The partnership between the Navajo Nation and Fielding has had different components. One is that we are offering an EDD degree to facilitate these Navajo educators enhancing their credentials without removing them and uprooting them from their communities where they're actually needed. Also, our Navajo doctoral students offer their research. They give back to the nation and have for several years now of the research that they're doing to enhance educational opportunity on the nation. Our 6th conference will be this July, the end of July in Window Rock, Arizona. Then through the Office of the Navajo Nation Scholarship and Financial Aid Office, financial assistance is offered to eligible doctoral students. So there is strong support from the Navajo Nation for advancing a lot of the work that they're doing in researching to advance the language and the culture in the education throughout the nation. Here's 2 just recent examples of some of research that's been conducted by Navajo educators. And these are 2 students that are completing their doctorate of education at Fielding at this point. And you can see the kind of research is culturally relevant research that they're doing. They're giving back to the nation. You can see that soon to be Dr. Rolanda Billy is working on with Head Start children and enhancing culturally relevant education for those early Head Start children. And then you can see that soon to be Dr. Michelle Sosi is looking at some of the lives of the Navajo women. And she did an in-depth narrative inquiry about how their lives have been influenced by their native culture, traditions, and stories. So these are really giving back to the nation, not just doing research for the sake of doing research, but for search for advocating for the nation, for the culture, for the language, and for educational sovereignty on the nation. So I will now stop sharing my screen and turn it over to our distinguished panelist, Dr. Manly Begay. And Manly, I believe you're on mute.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. And, this project related to the book, The Future of Navajo Education was an excellent project for those of us that participated to begin to wrestle with the fundamental question of what should the Navajo Nation educational process look like? What are we? What should educating for what is sort of the question that we wrestle with, and to understand the different components of or the significance of education for the future of the Navajo Nation. And so this is sort of what we were wrestling with. And the chapter that I contributed dealt specifically with sort of the business economic context and thinking about what's really needed as we look forward 50 years from now, 100 years from now. What is the Navajo Nation going to look like? What part should education play in the building of the Navajo Nation? So this fits quite well with the theme of this particular conference, Co-Creating an Equitable Future, Social Justice, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the 21st Century. It fits very well because, for one, the Navajo Nation was here long before the Europeans arrived to North America. And yet today, we suffer a tremendous amount of social inequity and inclusion, and also social justice. And much of this is not of our own making, but it's a result of colonization that has gone on for over 400 years. So this is the topic that I was wrestling with. It's always appropriate to introduce yourself through clans. We're a matriarchal society. And so my mother's clan is the Coyote Pass White Corn people, or the Jemez Pueblo people. We say, and my father's clan is Tachini, the Running Into the Water people. And my maternal grandfather's clan is Lukatana, which are the Reed people. And my paternal grandfather's clan is Turichini, Bitterwater people. So that's who I am as a Navajo person. I am married to a Navajo woman, and we have 2 kids, and we have 3 grandkids. The work that I do, excuse me, the work I do at Northern Arizona University is around the Tribal Leadership Initiative, is getting that up and running. And essentially, the leadership initiative is really about providing educational services in the form of executive education sessions around the work that Indigenous leaders are doing in the building of their nations. I teach also the Native Nation building courses, and also provide advisory services to Indigenous nations and their leaders around the idea of development, around the idea of how to build nations that work. So to begin, I think it's really important to understand the history of the Navajo people as it relates to the colonizers. You know, the issues that we're wrestling with, the challenges that we face, really began in 1493 with the Bull of Demarcation being submitted, which really sort of rubber stamped, in a sense, colonization and Christianization. So in 1540 is when the invasion started with Coronado's first expedition. And this is when the Navajo people first met the colonizers and saw what their efforts were all about. It was really about colonization and Christianization. And and subsequently, the Spanish invasion occurred, and numerous numerous treaties were signed, in the 1600s, and then more treaties occurred also in the 1700s, and all the way into 1776, when the English colonists began to gain strength against England. And then after the Spanish were defeated by the Navajo people, and also after the Mexicans were defeated by the Navajo people, came the Americans, and so in 1846, that was sort of the period where the break occurred with our relationship with Mexico. And however, subsequently, we ended up having to deal with the Americans all through the 1800s and through the military invasion right during the Civil War period, or the end of the Civil War in 1865. and immediately, the federal policy of the United States really was about termination, or what was called termination through allotment. So land was, thousands and thousands of acres of land were actually stolen during this period of time, and which ushered in, after World War I, the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, which sort of gave a little bit of power and authority to indigenous people, yet was still controlled by the federal government in Washington, D.C. So remember, the theme throughout these eras were actually to Christianize and to civilize. So when all these federal policies did not culminate in colonization or Christianization, different types of policies kicked in. So the 1950s, during the after World War II and into Korean War, termination through derecognition occurred. So hundreds of indigenous nations were actually terminated and told to become like the rest of the United States, to become cities and towns and counties and so forth. So when that didn't work in the 1960s, you had the ushering in of the self-determination policy. Now, this is the first time that indigenous people were actually allowed to begin to make their own decisions about their future. And so we're now in this era, I think, is nation building. We're finally at a point in time when we can make the decisions ourselves, where sovereignty that has been promised to us is beginning to take root. Yet we're still not out of the woods, so to speak. But this is the best chance that we've had in determining our future. And so it was a really good time for this book to come out, for us to, as Navajo people, to wrestle with how do we undo, how do we move beyond the 400 years of Spanish, Mexican, and US onslaught and disruption. And even though in the midst of all of this, we have suffered tremendously, and there's been constant warfare. We've been enslaved. This is the sort of the slavery story that often is not told. where estimates are as high as 1/3 of the Navajo people were enslaved in in Mexico, working in silver mines, and also enslaved in New Mexico, Arizona, and elsewhere with the different colonizers. And treaty after treaties were signed. Every single treaty was broken. Diseases occurred, and Christianization attempts have all taken their toll. And part of it is where the all outright attack on traditional Navajo practices have been really openly viewed as primitive and backward and pagan. So this was a way to eradicate all that was Navajo, our lifeways, our culture, our language, and our thought. So what was a result of this disruption? It's really been distress in Navajo government, socioeconomic circumstances, education, health, life, and so forth. So colonization has hurt and has disrupted who we are as a people. And we're moving out of this finally in the era of freedom since around the 1990s, where we're able to make our own decisions the way we want it. So what should the future of education be in this particular context? So to give you a glimpse of who we are as Navajo people, just think about maybe the state of West Virginia, maybe added on a little bit of Massachusetts or a little bit of Vermont or even Maine. And that should be about the size of the Navajo Nation today. We're 28,000 plus square miles of land. And we're in New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. Most recently, Navajo Nation has bought land in Colorado. So we've actually had to rebuy our land. So it's kind of rather ironic and unfortunate that that's what we have to do. Yet, we're beginning to thrive. We have over 425,000 citizens. We're sovereign. We're a sovereign nation with our own laws. For instance, the Navajo Fundamental Laws, which is rooted in our creation stories and our journey narratives. This is where the laws come from. We have a 3-branch government. We even have our own Supreme Court. We have our own police force. And we have at least 5 different types of school systems. And we have our own Navajo Department of Education with our own superintendent of schools. We have 2 tribal colleges. My sister Miranda teaches at one of the colleges, at Dennett College. And the Navajo Nation's budget is over $1 billion, $1.5 billion, with I would say more than half is from transfer payments. So this is the context within which this particular book took on the task of considering the future of Navajo education. So my question to you, the audience, whom I can't see, is what would you do? If you were in our shoes, if you were in Miranda and my shoes, how would you think about the future of Navajo education? And knowing all good and well that you're a sovereign entity and you want to make these decisions yourself. So so that's sort of the question before you. And excuse me, the distress has really caused a tremendous amount of health issues. One way to determine how healthy a society is to look at the infant mortality rate. This is the most comprehensive indicator of the level of health in a society. It measures the well-being of infants, children, and their families. So infant mortality rate is the death of an infant at any time from birth up to, but not including the first year of life, 364 days. So the Navajo Nation's infant mortality rate is quite high. It's between 6.5 and 7. The reason why I wrote down 6.5 to 7 is because data is very hard to come by on the Navajo Nation. Not only because we go through, we're in 4 different districts, or excuse me, 4 different jurisdictions, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado, but also just how to keep data, who keeps data. And so this is the best data I could find to determine what the infant mortality rate is. You know, Japan, Sweden, some of the Northern European countries and Asian countries, you know, their infant mortality rate hovers around 2.3, 3 per 1,000 infants that die. So you want to get down to 2 or 3. So you can see here that the infant mortality rate is really high, which tells you that the Navajo Nation faces some huge health challenges. So the infant mortality rate at Navajo is similar to to these countries, Russia, Virgin Islands, Qatar, Gibraltar, Kuwait, Puerto Rico, so forth. So it gives you some context to think about where the Navajo Nation is at. The 5 health issues facing the Navajo Nation are the following: unintentional injuries, cancer, chronic liver disease, and cirrhosis, suicide, and heart disease. 4 out of these health issues are actually preventable, and you know, cancer is the tough nut to crack, so to speak. However, prevention can occur for some cancers if you live a healthy lifestyle, but the others are preventable. Employment, unemployment rate at Navajo is 44.25%. That's huge. Educational attainment rate on the Navajo Nation. Here's a statistic: only 7.11% of Navajos have a bachelor's degree or higher. So how do you build a nation when the percentage of Navajo people that have a bachelor's degree or higher is this low? So the significance of education and employment is really, really critical. Some work has been done around determining how do we get more American Indians employed, and the answer lies in higher education. This is the significance of education, in particular higher education, in the employment of Native peoples. So American Indians with advanced degrees have 7 times the odds of finding employment than American Indians with less than a high school education. So we'll come back to that, and I'll show you how that occurs. The per capita income is also very, very low. It's probably lower now because of the pandemic and how jobs have been really hard to find on the Navajo Nation. So you can see here that the per capita income for Navajo people is less than $8,000 per year, whereas at the US per capita is at 51 plus. More data, Navajos that live below the poverty level is 43%. There's less than 200 certified Navajo-owned businesses. These are entrepreneurs, would-be entrepreneurs. And the money that's spent off the Navajo Nation is over $1 billion, or 71% or 62% of every dollar that Navajo peoples have. And here's also another statistic: most of the jobs, 80% of the jobs on the Navajo Nation is in the government, is in Navajo Nation government and service sector. So most of the jobs that are there are 50% service and 30% government. So how do you change this? How do you change this around? So here's the business economic context of the Navajo Nation. Historically, the Navajo Nation has relied on coal and oil, but as we all know, because of climate change, this reliance on coal and oil is not sustainable. So what do you do when a huge portion of your budget actually comes from coal and oil extraction? and recent technological advances really, with fracking, gets at the impact of oil and gas extraction. So there's movement away from oil and gas extraction, but what do you replace it with? So that's the fundamental question. Because of new strict environmental regulations, coal and oil is really no longer sustainable. So there has to be changing of Navajo mindsets away from reliance on coal and oil, beginning to think about other ways to finance the Navajo Nation. In the midst of this, there is sort of a shining light. The Navajo Master Trust Fund is right now, I believe, over $3 billion. So this is a trust fund that's the Navajo Nation has been managing for many, many decades. And so there's this fund that's sitting there that could be leveraged. And there's only one Navajo holding company, the Natani Development Corporation. So the challenges, some of the challenges facing the Navajo people is how do we diversify the Navajo economy so that entrepreneurship becomes a major part of tribal enterprises as economies. So how do we do that? How do we build a sustainable economy? How do we improve health? How do we increase high school and college graduation rates? How do we do that? How do we increase more Navajo entrepreneurs? And then how do we manage and think about the amount of funds that are spent through the scholarship that Navajo Nation has to offer for our young kids, and parallel that with the jobs that are truly needed for the challenges that we face. So this is a tough task, but in this particular book, I took a stab at how to do this. what should we think about? And clearly, some of the actions that needs to be taken by the Navajo Nation and their leaders is really to restructure the government that reflects traditional Navajo codes, policies, and laws. Excuse me. And what should that look like? I think this is a task for, I think, all educational institutions, including Fielding Graduate University, is to think about how do we do this? Many of these issues and problems occur in third world countries. And a lot of researchers go to Africa, go to other places to wrestle with these issues when in their backyard, often the same kind of issues are occurring on indigenous lands. And so I think there needs to be really a refocus by universities to begin to think about partnerships with indigenous nations to think about the issues and problems that they're wrestling with, and really clearly begin to define what actions might be needed to build nations that work. So one of the other actions that need to be taken, I think, is to redefine notions of sovereignty that's really rooted in Navajo epistemology. How do traditional Navajo people think about the meaning and definition of sovereignty, rather than taking the definition of sovereignty as it comes out of the United States Supreme Court cases that come out of the Supreme Court, which often lessens the stance, the sovereignty stance by indigenous people. And we need to recognize that our governing structure really needs to change. We cannot continue in the current governing system that we have, which is a three-branch government that has an executive branch, a judicial branch, and a legislative branch. We need to separate business from politics. And we really need to develop and practice good governance that's really rooted in Navajo epistemology and Navajo way of life. We've got to set priorities. We have to plan, and then actually truly act and develop and support small businesses. We need to think long-term sustainability. And so how do we make sure that the Navajo Nation stands on its own 2 feet? We had to redefine and assert sovereignty, invest in education, especially early childhood education. We have to think long-term financial investment, just like the master fund that's set up, that's now reached nearly over $3 billion. And how do we capitalize on that, increase that amount so that we no longer have to worry and think about transfer payments from the federal government. Rather, let's have our own money and then we can spend it the way we want to spend it, because often transfer payments have strings attached to it. We have to strengthen and invest in culture and language. This is where you'll see at Fielding Graduate University, a lot of the dissertations that come out of Fielding revolves around culture and language and how to strengthen that. We have to improve maternal and child health. We have to strengthen our own judicial structure and develop a strategic plan. So before we do all of that, it is my belief that we have to have a long-term 50-year, maybe a 100-year strategic plan. And to this day, we really don't, the Navajo Nation does not have a strategic plan. What is the Navajo Nation going to look like 100 years from now? What is it that we would value highly? What are our priorities? And what are our concerns? And how do we, what's our vision of the future? And I think how to get to this eventuality 50 years from now, 100 years from now, is really by creating an educated workforce. Here's the significance of education that I was telling you about. So Dr. Austin put this particular research project or research findings together. He found that if you have a GED, you have actually a 50% chance of odds of employment, but high school doubles. If you have some college, it's 192%. This is for American Indians. But look at the bachelor's degree. If you get a bachelor's degree or an advanced degree, the chances of your odds of employment increases tremendously. There's a 427% chance of getting a job if you have a bachelor's degree. An advanced degree, 607%. So this tells you that why education is so important. Not because you want to get a job, but because out of that job, you can begin to work against poverty issues and conditions. You can begin to think about the skills, knowledge, and abilities that you've acquired in higher education. So it increases the chances of the Navajo Nation moving forward in a very positive way. So in the book, what I wrote down in the chapter, really from a business economic standpoint, is how do we begin to create our own fund? How do we create ways of sustaining the Navajo Nation? And it goes back to education. But what kind of personnel do we need to build a Navajo Nation that works? We need financial analysts, investment managers, bankers, business executives. You might think, oh, this sounds very capitalistic. And it might be, however, when you're from the Navajo Nation and you see the problems and issues that Navajo Nation is facing, it's really rooted in us taking control of our own people and our own resources and our own assets, and beginning to train our own people to begin to make decisions based on Navajo values and Navajo ways of being. So Navajo architects or Navajo environmental engineers might be very different in terms of their values and being than others. We need scientists, we need engineer specialists, we need Navajo information technology specialists, policy analysts, market researcher, international trade specialists, so forth and so on. So why invest in education at Navajo? It's because it really is about realizing the Navajo Nation's dreams, the Navajo Nation people, the people from the Navajo Nation, what their dreams are. Like this young girl here, sort of thinking through, what is her life going to be 50 years from now? What will she have accomplished? And so it's really about the grandchildren and those that are not born yet. It's about these kids and planning for them to give them a half decent chance at building a Navajo nation that they will feel proud of. So this is the task that we took on in the book, sponsored by Fielding Graduate University, The Future of Navajo Education. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Begay. I mean, wonderful, complete history, understanding of the context, but the enormity of this, of the challenge that we have to address. And hopefully some of the stuff that we're doing with the people that Miranda's working with Henry's working with our cohort of 20 plus Navajo educators that are getting their advanced degree are actually giving back to those early students in Head Start all the way through college age to support that kind of sovereignty of the nation. Miranda, I'll turn it over to you to share your screen.
Good morning. I'm glad all of you could join us this morning and hear this wonderful presentation that my colleagues and I have prepared for you today. And we're grateful to the opportunity to share this important information with you. In my research with Navajo and Fielding, much of my research has also included the importance of archival research. And I'm an alumni from Fielding Graduate University. I was one of the first cohort members of the first cohort that was established in 1998. And in retrospect, I began to think about how significant this partnership was that the Navajo Nation had with Fielding. And I began to think about who's archiving this history. And so it became important to recollect and try to gather as much historical information as I could about this significant partnership that we have with Fielding, the Navajo Nation and Fielding Graduate University. And so as Navajo people, we introduce ourselves according to our clan, Yate. Hello, my relatives. My clan is the Salt clan, Ashihi. I'm born for the Many Goats clan, Izatlana Bashishchin, and my maternal grandfathers are the Red House clan, Kintlachitni, Dashache, and my paternal grandfathers are the Bitterwater clan, whom are the Twittichitni clan. And Luk'ajagai, Dan Nasha, I'm from Luk'ajagai, Arizona, here in the central part of the Navajo Nation. So I'm all glad you're here to join us. So my presentation is just going to cover what this partnership included. Well, the partnership with the first cohort formally began in 1998. There were meetings that occurred between sub-faculty from Fort Lewis College, Dr. Gary Knight and Farron Webb, who taught in the College of Education. And throughout their career, they were contributing to and constantly thinking about how to build, the college graduates across Navajo through the teacher education program and beyond, with their attainment of a bachelor's degree and certification in elementary or secondary education. They also recognize the need to create doctorates and people with graduate degrees in master's programs as well. And so Dr. Knight and Webb were invited to a meeting with Fielding at the time that was led by the school dean, Dr. Willie D. Marcel Smith. And he had envisioned creating a doctoral program that would be accessible to people in more rural parts of the country, or who didn't have access and opportunity to in-residence programs, yet possess the desire to attain a doctoral degree. And so in addition, he saw the need of serving these underserved communities. And one of the best ways in which to do that was to build the human capital, if you will, in these parts throughout the United States and now globally, including the Navajo Nation. And so Dr. Knight and Webb were a part of this initial conversation, and they too recognized the underrepresentation of Navajos in higher education, and they sought to address this. And thus began this partnership between the Navajo Nation and Fielding. It was established, the first cohort began in 1998, and the partners, as Barbara explained to us earlier, included the Office of Navajo Nation Scholarship and Financial Assistance, led by the director, Rose Graham. Her support has been instrumental in helping our cohort students offset the cost of their education as they pursue their doctoral degrees with Fielding Graduate University in the School of Leadership Studies, of which Dr. Barbara Mink is the dean of. And so Fielding has had this long partnership going on over 20 years with the Navajo Nation in developing Navajo doctoral students. And then the partners also include the cohort leaders, beginning with Dr. Gary Knight, Farron Webb, and now Dr. Henry Fowler and I, who are leading this third cohort. They too have been instrumental in helping the cohort achieve their goals with their doctorates in education. And earlier, Barbara talked about, out of this grew in 2017, the very first Navajo Education Conference. And this was convened by Dr. Barbara Mink and Dr. Henry Fowler in coordination with Rose Graham, and actually occurred because of the question Rose had about what was the research that the Navajo doctoral students conducted at Fielding. And she wanted to hear more about that. And this idea then occurred in which a conference would be convened, led by Fielding alumni, to present to the Navajo Nation here. The first conference was held at the Navajo Nation Museum in Window Rock, Arizona, here, to present what their doctoral research entailed, and to just give the Navajo Nation an idea of what the investment in their education was and how it tremendously assisted, the future growth of the Navajo Nation. Since that time, Fielding has been ranked #1 in 2001 for awarding doctorates to American Indians. And by 2009, the Chronicle of Higher Education named Fielding Graduate University one of the top 10 institutions awarding the most doctorates to the US minority group members. And this, ties in perfectly to the theme of our conference today about social justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion in the 21st century. And Fielding is continuing to lead that path and helping the Navajo Nation achieve that as well. To date, there have been 3 Navajo cohorts. The first cohort was convened in 1998. And at that time, they had admitted 25 Navajo doctoral students. Of that initial 25, 44% of us completed our doctorate in educational leadership and change. A second cohort was convened in 2013, and 7 of that second cohort completed their doctorates in education. And the most recent cohort that Dr. Henry Fowler and I lead was convened in 2018. And there were 20 Navajo doctoral students who were admitted at that time, and 4 of them have completed to date. And you heard the first 2 doctoral research that was presented earlier in Dr. Meek's presentation. So in 2017, when that first Navajo Education Conference was convened, these were some photos that were taken at that time. And we all served here, this upper left-hand photograph here, on a panel. And in that panel, you've got a picture of Dr. Gary Knight over here and Farron Webb from the College of Fort Lewis College, and Dr. Jenny Edwards, who happened to be my chair in my dissertation committee when I was in my doctoral program at Fielding. And then we've got some colleagues here, Dr. Pandora Mike, who's a principal on one of the schools on Navajo. You've got a picture here of Dr. Henry Fowler behind me here, and Dr. Berlinda Begay, who also works in education and has her own consulting business as well, with Navajo curriculum, Navajo language and Navajo studies curriculum. And so this has been, you know, the impact that Fielding has had in developing the human capital and professional educators across Navajo for us. And I've just got a picture here up close of Farron Webb and Dr. Gary Knight. And then my chair there, Jenny Edwards and I. And just to give you an idea about who we all are. As we served on this panel, Gary Knight and Farron reflected on the impact of these Navajo doctorates. And Farron, in his recollection, was talking about how 42 years ago, the Navajo Nation began discussions about creating their own Department of Education. And Farron began to think about that, and he was quoted as saying, at the time, it seemed like a fantasy, a dream beyond. And yet today in 2021, we do have a division of education, and they lead the education for pre-K to 12 across the Navajo Nation. Gary reflected by saying, my goodness, we had ideas back in the 1980s about developing a Native American program to produce professors for us and to produce teachers. And Farron and Gary were College of Education professors at Fort Lewis College, and they did tremendous amount of recruitment and work in developing Navajo educators across Navajo, and that was up through their undergraduate degree, but recognized the need that existed in graduate education. And so they realized the importance of this partnership with Fielding that could help further their particular goals in developing Navajo doctoral students. And so they were instrumental in this partnership, and they recognized how integral infusing school curriculum with the language and studies were to promoting Navajo school children's success. And more importantly, they saw that Navajo teachers in their own classroom teaching Navajo school children would promote Navajo student success. And Gary then reflected about how, as he looked at the Navajo doctoral students in 2017 at the conference, that they blended education, traditional education, and Navajo ideas. And you saw in those, the dissertation research of two of our colleagues there at the beginning of Barbara's presentation, how they've done just this. On Navajo and at Fielding, archived are all of the doctoral dissertations. And I would venture to say that they have a very good repository of dissertation research specific to Navajo studies in such areas as education, Diné studies, the Navajo language, and they serve as a tremendous resource to continue to advance scholarly research about Navajo studies on Navajo, and they were conducted by Navajo doctoral students. And so where are these Navajo students? And so when you think about my brother Manley Begay's presentation earlier, he talked about, the history of federal Indian policy in the United States and its impact upon us as Navajo people. And so this is important because it speaks about the tremendous strides that we have made in developing the Navajo Nation and establishing the Navajo Nation and beginning to address the needs that Manley talked about in his presentation, one of which is he called for action about long-term sustainability. And that's exactly what many of our alumni from Fielding Graduate University will accomplish. In my career throughout Navajo, I'm a professor at Diné College, one of the tribally controlled colleges on the Navajo Nation. And over the course of my 30-year career at Diné College, time and time again, I have seen so many non-Navajos come through the college. They bring in this wealth of knowledge and expertise, but they eventually leave, contributing to this concept of what's called a brain drain on the Navajo Nation, in which this talent and expertise leave the Navajo. And yet Fielding is different in that by developing Navajos on the Navajo Nation, by bringing the doctoral program to them so that they remain rooted in their communities, which many of us are, we build that capacity and achieve this goal of Manley about long-term sustainability. And in doing so, we accomplish an additional need, which is investing in the education of our Navajo people. And in this particular case with Fielding Graduate University and the Doctorate of Educational Leadership and Change. And so some of the leadership positions that they've assumed upon graduation include that of principals, superintendents. We have an Apache County superintendent that was a Fielding graduate, the Division of the Education superintendent that's also a graduate of Fielding. And then many of them have also gone on to board member positions with kindergarten to 12th grade schools across Navajo. And then you have Dr. Fowler and I, who teach at the tribal colleges on Navajo. Dr. Henry Fowler teaches mathematics at Navajo Technical University, and then I teach sociology at Diné College. And furthermore, many of us continue to develop much needed curriculum in the areas of Navajo language and Diné studies. And this curriculum becomes utilized by many of the teachers across Navajo as we continue to preserve and revitalize the Navajo language for future generations, along with Diné studies. And so this is the important significance that this partnership with Fielding and the Navajo Nation has been in our goal to building the 21st century on the Navajo Nation. And so we're very grateful for our partnership with the Navajo Nation. And so this concludes my presentation. Thank you. You're on mute, Barbara.
Hillary, you were monitoring the chat. If there's any questions, comments from some of the folks that are here. No chat yet. She just texted me. So I don't know if folks are having issues with putting in questions or whatever. The book that we kept referring to is actually the future of Navajo education. And it is available through Fielding, but it's also on Amazon. One of the things that I've actually done is I was brazen enough to write Dr. Jill Biden and tell her about the kind of work that you folks are doing on the nation, and sent her a copy of the book to see, because I know President Biden is really looking at, focusing on working with Native peoples, and particularly the Navajo Nation. And he had an executive order back last October, I think, to help Native American colleges and universities. So I thought, why not, let our leaders of the US see the kind of work that we're doing down there. I don't know if it's going to have any effect, but it's worth a try. And then Miranda, you are also put in a presentation for a conference in October. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, so we submitted a proposal to present at the National Indian Education Association. And we'll be presenting on this very topic about the recent publication of our book, The Future of Navajo Education, and the impact that our cohort model and the graduation rate of Navajo doctorates in education and their reinvestment in the Navajo Nation and creating this concept of and contributing to this concept of long-term sustainability, which is also in line with the conference theme this year and their goal to continue to develop Navajo professionals in the area of education so that they can be impactful in the education of Native American children across the reservations and the Native nations in which they serve and teach. So we're looking forward to that.
They're also, I got an email from them this morning to Miranda. They're interested in maybe sending a representative to our July conference in Window Rock. So hopefully we can work out a relationship with that organization as well.
Mhm.
Let's see, Brenda Yazzie had a question. I think we can address that maybe offline because it's pretty detailed about what is the process of the Navajo IRB. And that's more than just a 2-minute discussion, I think. So actually, Brenda, Dr. Haskey actually runs a particular session for our cohort members on, because you have to go through the Navajo IRB as well as the Fielding IRB when you do research. So this will be addressed in your doctoral studies. Then the question came, it says, Dr. Begay, it says, you mentioned the need for a strategic plan. It said, what do you think it might look like?
Okay, that's a really good question. I have my own perspective of what 100 years from now the Navajo Nation would look like. It really is about answering a set of questions, and the questions are really around the following. What language do you want your child to be speaking? How much culture do you think your child ought to know? And what type of cultural knowledge would be important for that child to know 50 years from now, 100 years from now? Where do you want them to live? You want them to live at home where you are at now, or do you want them to live elsewhere? What kind of home do you want them to have? We have our traditional hogan, but we also have modern homes as well. Mm-hmm. How do you want your dwelling to look like? What kind of education do you want your child to have? Mm-hmm. Do you want them to have training in particular types of job skills, or do you want them to go to college or universities, and at what level? Mm-hmm. And these are some fundamental questions that have to be answered to be able to plan for the future. And what kind of jobs do you want them to have? What kind of work do you want them to be doing? how healthy do you want your child to be when they reach 50 years old or 60 years old? You know, what do you want to accomplish? What do you want them to accomplish? So if you can imagine a grandchild or one of your own kids that might be 2 years old or 3 years old now, 50 years from now, they'll be 52, 53. How do you want them to have evolved? If we don't answer that particular question now, we evolve haphazardly. We don't have a plan and how they want to evolve, how we would like our children to evolve, how we want our grandchildren to evolve. And those type of plannings really is in the realm of parenthood as well as leadership. So the answers to those questions are fundamental to understanding what a strategic plan might look like. And there are a number of other questions as well that I could talk about, but that's just sort of a beginning. I envision a Navajo Nation that's absolutely strong, in cultural knowledge. The reason why cultural knowledge is so critical and important is because that forms the foundation for who we are, for our identity and our well-being. If you don't really know your identity well, how do you expect to survive in the world? How do you expect to thrive in the world? It's very difficult to do that. So it really forms the basis. Your culture, your language forms the basis for who you are. From there, once you're rooted, then you can take out any task. You can take out any challenges that might come about, because you know who you are, you know what you're about, you know where you come from, you know who your family is, you know the strengths that they have, and you can move through this world pretty easily, confident that you know your place in the world because it's rooted in your cultural knowledge, your language, and who you are as a person. So that would be my quick answer.
No, very comprehensive. There was another question that was mentioned. Are there any plans to expand to with other indigenous populations in part of the country? I have been down to Zuni Pueblo and had conversations with them, possible expansion. I know Henry has some connections with Apache. There might be some places there. I've also traveled up to Alaska to look at some of the native populations in Alaska, indigenous populations there. And then there's been an interest of some of the indigenous peoples in South America in terms of bringing back their language and their culture into their education to actually connect with our Navajo cohort and do an exchange. I think, Miranda, you remember we had one member of the Misak people come and make a presentation at one of our conferences. There's increased interest there of having some of our Navajo cohort go to Colombia to work with them to do those kind of exchanges. And let's see, there's also a question, and maybe Manley, you can look at that. It says, do you see the population of the nation increasing? And is that both pressure and opportunity?
Yeah, the population of the Navajo Nation is increasing tremendously, and a lot of it has to do with our clan structure. The clan structure is adhered to. So our clan structure, to describe it in a nutshell, really allows for us to understand who our relatives are. So the clan structure, even though Miranda and I, let's say we've never met, and once we meet, and she says that my clan is Ashiya, I know immediately that she's my sister. She because Ashiya and my clan, my Deshkijini, are the same clan. And so we become immediately relatives. So this allows for good relationships to be formed. You also don't just hold hands with anybody that you meet, because that person might be your sister or your brother, or your niece or nephew, or your mother or your grandma, or your grandpa. So you have to be very careful and respectful of people around you. So how does that apply to the population increase? Well, it's very carefully managed in a sense through the clan structure, through the clan system as well. And pressures inevitably comes about. However, because of the vastness of the land at Navajo, there are places to live. The issue is infrastructure development. The issue is roads, water lines, electric lines, having access to amenities. So that's where the pressures lie, not so much in the population increase, but more in the infrastructural issues that the infrastructural challenges that the Navajo Nation faces. And it's slowly improving. For instance, over 30% of the people at Navajo don't have water, running water. So that causes this out-migration of our people to neighboring towns and cities. And it's so important for in-migration to occur. But it will occur when there is increasing opportunities for jobs, increasing opportunities for infrastructure development. And I think you'll see people come home when that happens. That's sort of the ultimate barometer to determine how well is a nation doing by the immigration. People are returning home, They want to be here. They want to be home.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Begay. I think Cynthia put a question in the chat. I think we've talked about whether the template that you've talked about could be shared with other Indigenous people. And I think, Miranda, that's one of the reasons why you put in a proposal for that large national conference that's going to be in Oklahoma City in this fall. Because from what I can tell, there are usually hundreds and thousands of people from various tribes and nations that come to that. So hopefully we can share some of the work that you folks have been doing with a broader audience.
Could I just say one thing, Barbara,
Sure.
about the question that was raised by Sabrina? And I think that's a real good question. I think whether this particular type of program gets expanded to other Indigenous nations or not, it really rests with the commitment by the staff of Fielding, by also the board members, and support by the board at Fielding. I think that's really, really critical. Having served as a board of trustees for Fielding for a number of years, I understand that this commitment has to be a deep commitment, because Barbara Mink might retire, so who then takes over the helm, who then runs with the ball, so to speak. And so there has to be more Barbara Mink, but it should be rooted in the institution itself. This should be part of the goals, objectives, and vision of Fielding for the long haul. It shouldn't be sort of one and done. It should last for decades and decades, and it has to be a part of the institution in every which way imaginable.
Part of the strategic plan, part of the budgeting process. Yeah, long-term vision.
Absolutely.
Yes. I don't see anything else in the chat. So I will just see if Miranda, if you have any concluding comments you'd like to make, and then I'll let Manley make any concluding comments, and then I think we can end our presentation. Miranda, do you have any kind of summary things?
Well, I just wanted to, just elaborate on how important the fielding model was for me. Graduate at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And so that meant I had to leave home for that time. And yet the entire time I was out there, I longed to be home. And when I earned my bachelor's in Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from UNM, I was out the door the very next day and moving home to look at your guy. And eventually was married. And then my husband and I raised 4 children here at home on the Navajo Nation and look at your guy. And while I was here, I got work there at the time it was called Navajo Community College. And yet I knew that I wanted a graduate degree, but I didn't know how I was going to do that. And the challenge for me at the time was, how could I do it without leaving home? I was rooted in my community and I didn't have any desire to leave. And along came fielding. And for me, what was important was that it be accredited, and it was accredited. It afforded me the opportunity to remain rooted in my community, as well as raising my family here on the Navajo Nation and accomplishing that goal my brother Manley talks about of long-term sustainability, and being home to help continue to build the Navajo Nation. And fielding helped me and many of my colleagues do that. There are now 22 Navajo doctorates in all who have completed over the course of these 3 cohorts, and others that continue to come, other Navajos outside of the cohorts, because they realize the opportunity that fielding can extend to them. And so for that, I'm grateful, as my colleagues are as well, and the Navajo Nation, as we continue to generate important scholarly research on Navajo, about Navajo, and for Navajo, and more importantly, by Navajo people themselves.
Now, I also going to give you an opportunity, because you mentioned your children, and I know that your son Albert is very active in this work as well. So you're doing another generation. Could you tell us briefly about the kind of work that your son Albert is doing?
Right. So in this world of social media, he too recognized the need to continue to preserve the Navajo language, to help revitalize the Navajo language, and among his generation of millennials and generation Z. And so one of the ways that he felt he could reach that particular generation was through social media. And, he creates these short video clips in the Navajo language. And interestingly, many of his viewers are urban Navajos who, long for and desire to learn the Navajo language and culture, and are resorting to the social media to learn more about their identity and who they are as they live with their families in the urban areas. And so that's some of the work that he's doing. And he and I co-wrote a chapter in our book as well, in the intergenerational journey to preserve the Navajo language.
Yeah. So it's not only having an impact on you and your students, but your family is really expanding that through the next generation.
Yes.
Yeah. Manley, is there any kind of concluding questions, summary that you would like to end with?
Sure. Let me just say something about Miranda and her kids as well. One of her daughters actually went to school at Northern Arizona University and had the distinct pleasure of getting to know her. Just a wonderful human being, and I would call her my mother, because in Navajo, that's the way you address your sister's kids or daughter. And she said, "Don't call me mom, don't call me mom." But I would continue to call her mom. But I just it was a delight to have her around, and to just a wonderful, accomplished young lady, and I see only great things for her in the future. When I was asked to be a part of Fielding Graduate University Board of Trustees, I really took a look at Fielding to see, what is this institution all about? Why should I be on the board? And what part can I play in this? And what really was the tipping point that moved me to join the Board of Trustees and to serve all these many years to this year when I stepped down was really this particular program, the Navajo Education Graduate Program, which I didn't see anywhere else, at any other institution. And and that was the tipping point for me to say, yes, this particular institution has a commitment to Navajo people, and therefore I should be a part of it, and I should advance it. I should be able to build on it. And so I would love to see in the future this particular program continue to be a part of Fielding Graduate University, but secured through maybe an endowment, maybe secured through some long-term funding, so that that there's a legacy that's here from Fielding Graduate University to provide a needed service, a needed program to the Navajo people. And that's what I would like to see in the future. Whether that's going to happen or not, I don't know,
Yeah.
But I think if we all make a commitment to think about ways to do that, I think it can be done.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah, Cynthia raised a question in the chat about how they can support this effort.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're addressing, Manly. It really needs to be part of what we do at Fielding and not just a here again, there again program.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of higher ed institutions say they have a commitment to Native peoples, and often it's really short-lived, but it's really rooted in the higher educational system of the United States, beginning with Harvard University and being one of the first higher ed institutions ever to be established in the United States. Their primary mission and goals was really to provide education to Indigenous youth. Subsequently, it was the case with Dartmouth and William and Mary and other institutions as well. So, I'm a firm believer that if you don't commit and help to the first peoples of this nation, then how can you go help other people as well? How can you justify helping others when there's been an oversight with the first peoples, with the first people of this land? And how is the United States going to thrive if it doesn't help rise Indigenous peoples of this country? So there's a bit of irony and a bit of lesson, I think, in that. So, but I really, I really enjoyed my time serving on the Board of Trustees for Fielding, and met a lot of wonderful people, and really well missed the camaraderie among the board members. And I wish Fielding Graduate University well, and I do hope the Navajo program continues into the future.
If I have anything to say about it, you can guarantee that it's going to continue and thrive. So I want to again thank our distinguished presenters. Like I said, Dr. Manly Begay, decades international presence, a strong voice for sovereignty of the nation. And you can see in his presentation the depth of his passion for this work. And also Dr. Miranda Haskey has been so instrumental in working with the cohort members. She's an adjunct faculty member in our School of Leadership Studies, and is actually teaching courses this term, in kind of culturally relevant education. And we look forward to continually working with her. Let's see. I think we can close. Hillary just gave me a heads up that we can stay on camera and it'll close off the live feed. So again, this is vital work. This is important work. And I think, Manley, I'm going to echo what you were saying, is if we don't take care of this part of our work with the people who are here first, we're really missing something in our nation. And so this is vital work to all of us at Fielding, but just it's vital work to all of us just as individuals. So again, thank you for the time.